Hi, cultural geographers. This is Mrs. T. This is video 6 from week 3. Now, I didn't make all the videos for you. You've seen some that I curated from other content that is online. But this one is going to be a little bit longer than the other ones. Most of the other ones have been under 5 minutes long, and I'll try to keep this one under 15, but make sure your coffee's hot or you got a lot of ice in your drink and get those notebooks out so you can take some notes on this. Now, this information in this particular video corresponds directly with the first few pages in chapter 2. Now, whether you're using the 11th edition or the 12th edition or even the 10th edition is okay. This information is going to come from chapter 2, the population and migration chapter. Okay, so demography is one of the first words that is defined in chapter 2. Literally, this word means drawing people. So you might recognize the first of this for democracy, rule by the people, and graphy is drawing, like cartography or geography in general is literally drawing the earth. I love etymologies, and so I look at root words and what they mean in their origin languages to get definitions often. But today we use this word demography to study population trends. What's the makeup of a population? Where do people live and why? There's our why of where questions. And also, where are people leaving and why? Where are people going and why? Those are called population push and pull factors that we will look at in future videos. But literally, demography is drawing the people. And so that's one of the reasons why the first videos that you watched in this folder are about maps and the biases that we need to be careful to watch for in maps so we get accurate information and an accurate mental scape of the landscape that we are studying. Okay, so demography, the study of population trends. So this video is designed to tell you about the different types of population densities that are interesting on their own, but they're most helpful when you compare their meanings to each other. You can get a lot of information by making a comparison and using those critical analysis skills we talked about during week 1. So the population densities that we're going to look at, it's different ways of calculating population. We have the arithmetic calculation, the physiological population, and the agricultural population densities. And so here's how you calculate this, and this is one of the things that you need to understand about demography. One of the introductory levels of demography. Let me put my pointer down. I feel like I'm kind of hitting myself with it. One of the introductory concepts of demography is population density. So a basic population density, we'll start with the arithmetic density. All this is the number of people in the total population by the total land area that you have, or by whatever land area you're using. So for instance, in the United States, we use miles to measure distance or square miles to measure area. That's not very common in the world. Most people in the world use kilometers. So they have a different kind of concept of distance and shape and size of different plots of land that are part of their environment. So in the United States, it's the number of people per square mile that we usually use, or the number of people per square kilometer that's typically used in other countries of the world. Although we have a square kilometer calculation for the United States also. Okay, so this just simply tells us really how much land is available to the amount of people who are in the nation. If there is a whole lot of land and not a whole lot of people, then this is going to be a very small number, which means that you don't have a whole lot of people crammed in on top of each other having to use the same area because of limited amounts of area available. If this number is really, really high, it's because land area is sparse, land area is just a little bit, and there's a huge number of people who have to share that area. So high numbers for the arithmetic density means that there's a smaller amount of land per the number of people who have to use that land. And smaller numbers means that there's a whole lot of land in this denominator here with fewer people in the numerator here, which this is a fraction. You can see the way I've got this is the only math that we're going to be doing in class this semester. Maybe. Don't hold me to that. But anyway, the smaller the number here and the larger the number here, the more land there is per person. And so this gives us just a basic concept of area and population that shares that area. Let's move to the physiological density for a second, because that changes the area that you're looking at. Notice I have a vocabulary word here. It might be a new vocabulary for you. Arable land. This word is related to agriculture and food production. So food production and agriculture is going to be, or actually all subsistence strategies, not just agriculture. We're going to start with the first ones and move on to agriculture over the next couple of weeks with our topics in cultural geography class. So you foodies out there, folks in the culinary school, you're probably going to like these next couple of weeks quite a lot. But the arable word here refers to agriculture. This is the amount of land in that country, in that nation, that is able to be farmed. Okay, the amount of land that is in the farming field. And particularly, we focus on producing food, being able to produce food. You might know in the United States, we have a ton of farmland, but not all of it is used for food production. There are cotton fields that I pass on the way to my home, and there's a lot of corn fields at my sister's house in Iowa, and that corn up there is used for ethanol, and this cotton is used for the sweater I've got on. So there's a lot of farming activities that aren't necessarily done to produce food for a population. However, that information tells us a lot about the lifestyle and the economic standards that people within that population typically enjoy. So, physiological density, the number of people in the population, so it would be the same number as here, over the amount of arable land. So this amount, whether you're measuring it in square meters, square kilometers, or square miles, this arable land is a different thing altogether from your general land area. If your general land area includes a lot of rocks and mountains, or if you live in a place that is a desert environment, or doesn't have a whole lot of tributaries where you could use, you could modify the environment and make canals or reservoirs to hold water that you need for irrigation. If that kind of potential of the land is not there, if you have a country that's mostly desert, like some of the countries in northern Africa, then you don't have a whole lot of arable land. So if you have a whole lot of people in the population and not a whole lot of arable land, then you are going to have a lot of stress on the land that is available for food production in order to feed everybody in that country. And there's some other factors in here that you can also learn. So you might have a huge land mass, but not a whole lot of it is arable, but a huge population. How do you maintain that population without being able to produce your own food? Well, another thing we're going to talk about in future lectures is trade and globalism. So for instance, in a country like the United States, we have a lot of exports. Stuttgart, Arkansas is right down the street from me, and it's the rice capital of the world, right? Well, it's not because in the United States, rice is a staple at every meal, but in Asia, many places in Asia, rice is a staple at every meal. So we produce more rice in Arkansas than our population needs or wants. And so in places that don't have a whole lot of arable land or have really high population densities, and so you need land for living space rather than agricultural space, exports from one country to the next can make up for the differences in food production that one country is not able to produce for its population. for whatever reason. Maybe the amount of arable land is very, very small, and the number of people very, very high. How are you going to feed those people without really causing environmental trouble like desertification or erosion, other things like that that can happen when you try to modify the environment for agriculture's sake or any other cultural activity? You end up with some kind of environmental cost that can happen. So, when we look at the amount of arable land per the number of people in general, it tells us a lot about the physical environment that's there and whether that area is going to be able to exist independently and support its population or needs economic or commercial support and cooperation with other areas that are able to produce more food for themselves, an excess of food that their population has so much they don't need it all. Okay. And then this last one that I want to talk about, agricultural density, is a really interesting one for the first world, second world, and third world approach to organizing the world or keeping kind of a tally of the levels of development that have happened in countries around the world. And these levels of development we will talk much more about when we get to the demographic transition theory and also industrialization and urbanization. We'll focus on it a whole lot. But for the meantime, let me just explain that agricultural density, instead of looking at the total number of people in a population, you look at the total number of farmers per arable land. Now, let me clarify something here really quick. When we say farmers, I'm not talking about the people who actually own the farms. I'm talking about the people who work the land. That might be the landowner, but it might be a hired hand also. So if you have a large number of farmers per the amount of arable land, that tells us something about the amount of technology or the amount of industrialization that is not present in your culture, in your nation. If you have a large number of farmers per unit of arable land, whether it's square kilometers or square miles, that means you've got a lot of manual labor that has to go into producing the amount of food that the population needs. The amount of food that an area of land can produce is called a yield, the productivity and the yield. So the higher the number of farmers that are needed per unit of arable land tells you a lot about what kind of machinery is not available. If you have a small number of farmers per unit of arable land, in the United States, there's something like one farmer per square mile of arable land. The ratio is somewhere close to that. You can look it up to make sure, but it's something like one farmer per square mile. That's not because he's smarter or she's more intelligent. That's because of the machinery that we have access to. We have refineries that produce the fuel that need to operate these things. We have the factories that make them. We have the money resources to purchase them. We have tons of technological advances to make it unnecessary for so many people to go into farming as a profession, whether you own the equipment or you're operating somebody else's equipment. It's whoever is working the land. If you have a huge number of farmers per arable land, that tells you a lot about the degree of industrialization in that particular society. So these population density numbers are not so valuable really if you hold them alone. If you only look at arithmetic population density, it's not going to really tell you so much. But when you look at all of these in comparison to each other, you can use those critical thinking skills we've talked about to develop or to glean information about a culture and the economic background, the work and employment, the ability to be self-sustaining, and those kinds of pieces of information by comparing these different kinds of densities to each other. So this is not the only video when we're going to look at these things. We will be mentioning each of these again, especially in the coming weeks when we look at the demographic transition model, and we venture into the agriculture chapter, which we're going to talk about early on in the semester. And when we compare these to each other, you will also get that better idea of why we classify countries in the world according to their levels of development. We can look at these raw numbers and get a lot of information about the lifestyle and the culture and the ability to produce enough food for their population to survive on their own or not. The level of globalization that's necessary for a country to survive. The dependency. There's another theory called dependency theory that we will look at also. The level of dependence one country has on another country, and perhaps the exploitation that can happen because of that. Lots of topics to discuss in cultural geography class. These are kind of logistical things that I'm going over. There will be one more video this week that we're going to look at population pyramids and how to interpret those, because we need to be able to, you need to be able to evaluate those for your first project, your first 50-point project that I will tell you about next week and get a due date. So I will see you again on YouTube. Bye.